Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. We are currently about 12 days into 3.19, so I thought I would do a bit of a roundup of how the metagame is shaking out so far, what ascendancies are popular and unpopular, what defensive archetypes are working well and are not working well, and which primary skills are players mostly using. So let's start with the methodology. For those of you that haven't seen one of these videos before, this is drawn by looking at the ladder. This is a list GGG publish of the top 15,000 characters by XP, as well as the top 15,000 characters by solo delve depth. These overlap a lot, and especially in softcore, the 15,000 players on it can juggle around a little bit as well. So if someone's at level 96 and they have a death, that might cause them to drop quite a bit down the ladder, and then they can rebuild some of that over time, or maybe they don't, maybe other people just start overtaking them. Combined, these give an overview of the most successful build archetypes, and the website POE.ninja scrapes this data. There's also similar ladders available for the hard modes, so that includes solo self-found, hardcore solo self-found, and hardcore trade. The harder game modes often sharply constrain what successful builds can look like, although that hasn't quite been as much the case in this league. Now, it's worth noting that there will be a small number of people who play around with their builds for a bit of a laugh here, and so you'll sometimes get a small amount of really misleading data. That said, this is a pretty small factor. There's not very many people that do this. The Ascendancy spread. In the top right corner of the screen, blocked by my face, is Pathfinder at 6%. So here you can see the softcore trade-enabled situation for Ascendancy spread. This isn't perfect, but it's actually one of the best we've seen. It's pretty much always the case that there's a few Ascendancies that stand head and shoulders above the rest. So this league, that is the Inquisitor standing head and shoulders above everyone, then the Occultist and Elementalist standing head and shoulders above everyone else, and then you've got the Champion and the Deadeye as the last of the top 5, and the ones that are truly overperforming. At the bottom end, there's quite a few Ascendancies that aren't very popular, but sometimes this is due to the nature of the softcore trade environment. So for example, the Juggernaut is not very popular in softcore trade, but it does do pretty well in hardcore solo self-found. After you account for that, it is the Assassin, the Hierophant, and the Chieftain that are in the worst place at the moment, although none of them are in as bad a place as Trickster was last league. This isn't perfect, but it's the best Ascendancy diversity that we've actually ever had, to the best of my knowledge. That's for now. We'll see how that holds on as the league ages. The Trickster and Juggernaut overhauls are doing what I might term okay and meh respectively in softcore trade, but hardcore solo self-found has both of these overhauled Ascendancies doing quite a bit better, and the Trickster is doing well in softcore solo self-found. So for that reason, I'm willing to call the Trickster overhaul a success, and the Juggernaut one not really a success, but certainly not a failure. The Hierophant, Assassin, and Chieftain, like we were saying before, are the low performers across all of the game modes, whereas an Ascendancy like the Slayer can be a bit more popular in hardcore. So for defensive styles, I'm basically repeating exactly what was said in 3.18, with one exception, and that is referencing that a Defiance Banner nerf happened. Determination, Defiance Banner, and Molten Shell are so overpowered that almost every very high level character uses them all, even in softcore, especially in hardcore. Defiance Banner use is down on 3.18 after the massive nerf the skill received, but it is still the 4th most used active skill. That should give you a sense as to how incredibly powerful it was in the past, that GGG came along, halved the effect of it, and it is still the 4th most used active skill in the game, behind Determination, Molten Shell, and one other. Divine Shield and Aegis Aurora are very popular among players that can afford the setup. That is very expensive this league, and so that is not very many. Now, Grace is popular, especially with Ghost Dance, but not nearly to the same extent. And the Aura Discipline is far less popular and really is underperforming relative to the rest. This is essentially exactly the same as the last couple of leagues, despite the fact that Defiance Banner was nerfed, and despite the fact that the Mastery that gave 15% mana reservation efficiency was removed. That hasn't really changed anything here. The same sorts of defensive setups that were popular in the past remain popular today. Defenses overall, we fundamentally continue to see the 3.16 era shift away from big effective life pools and towards a mitigation focus, and this is why Energy Shield is not performing as well as Life at the moment. Life is easier to combine with other sources of mitigation, whereas Energy Shield, whilst it's not an all or nothing focus, it is closer to one than Life builds are, and therefore your decision to go Energy Shield undermines the amount of armor you can get on your character, undermines the amount of evasion you can get, and therefore ends up with you being less defensively tanky. Endurance charges are more popular than they've been in the past, with the very expensive Grand Spectrum Jewel that grants +1 minimum endurance charges per Grand Spectrum equipped. It's currently going for just under 2,000 Chaos in softcore trade, and this is very popular among players who can afford it. and Enduring Composure on clusters is used as a budget alternative. However, endurance charges are still not seeing all that much use. We're looking around 11% of players that are speccing into them in a significant way. So this means either using that Grand Spectrum or using Enduring Composure. This is up from 6% in 3.18, so it is up quite a bit, and the change is all due to that Grand Spectrum duel existing. Skills-wise, this is actually the highest skill diversity that we've seen, both in high-level characters, which we'll call 95+, and very high-level characters, which we'll call 98+. Both of these are incredibly diverse at the moment. Vaal Lightning Strike has taken over at number 1. With the slight nerfs that took place to Fire Trap in 3.19, Righteous Fire/Fire Trap builds have fallen a little bit. They're still very popular, and they are still the second most popular build, but Vaal Lightning Strike has taken over. This is a build that's been around in its current form for quite some time, and that's why a number of people are starting to get sick of it. On the plus side though, Vaal Lightning Strike has a lot of different versions. There's Elemental Trinity builds, which are often Champion or Raider, and then there's Pathfinder Poison builds, which is something a little bit different. The Pathfinder build has completely replaced the Assassin for Poison on this skill. In third place, we have Explosive Arrow Ballista, which is quite a bit down in popularity based on last league, but is still fine. Fourth place, we have Spark, which is being cast in a few different ways. We have Inquisitor self-cast crit builds. There's also non-Inquisitor Spark builds, and there's also an Inquisitor Mine build that seems to be doing pretty well as well. And then in fifth place, we have the newcomer, Lightning Conduit, which is mostly played on Elementalists, and seems to be doing really well. A bunch of honourable mentions. We've got Venom Gaia on a Deadeye, we've got Cyclone Shockwave as a Slayer, we've got Cyclone cast on Critical Strike, Ice Spear or Forbidden Rite as an Occultist, we've got Replica Dream Feather and Introspection clusters, so this is the Aura Stacker armor base build, usually uses Smite to attack, although not always. We have Cold Conversion Blade Vortex Occultist, we have Caustic Arrow Occultist, we have Poisonous Concoction Deadeye, Corrupting Fever Champion, and there is a lot more. There are a lot of builds that are putting up at least 1% at the moment. If we restrict just to the top 16% of the ladder, this is the people who've reached level 98 or above, then the pattern looks quite similar. Lightning Strike, Righteous Fire, and the Trickster Ascendancy overall underperform a little bit here, and Spark overperforms, but otherwise it's pretty similar. What really surprised me though is that there are 30 different builds that are each 1% of the meta or more amongst the level 98s. There's actually a level of build diversity that we've not seen before. Normally when you look at this metric, you're not looking at 30, you're looking at about 15 instead. And here you've got 30 different builds that are performing at that level. So this is really interesting, and it's something I want to try and explore a little bit because it's one of those questions that I had. Why are we seeing so much build diversity here? Whilst I didn't expect this to be the case, I did want to try and come up with an explanation. Harvest is weaker for power gamers than it's been before this league. This made ROG better in relative terms, and it shifted the balance of crafting away from deterministic methods and towards the less deterministic methods. ROG is the pinnacle of non-deterministic crafting. It's basically somewhat of a slot machine where you often get a good result, but it's never the one that you particularly were chasing. Now, when you non-deterministically craft, you make great things by accident that are too good to roll over. These get sold to other players. Contrast this to higher power harvest. If you have a top-end craft, the cost of it gets dictated by the most powerful thing that can be done with it, and therefore the top-end crafts get used primarily to make the same items each time, to make the things that are known to be the most powerful. And this means that this league, there's a lot more things that are getting made by accident that are very good, and someone can look at something that's come out of ROG and say, you know what, I wasn't planning to play an Ice Shot character this league, but that bow is absolutely incredible for Ice Shot. And because Ice Shot is off meta, that bow is only going to cost me 500 chaos, whereas if Ice Shot was on meta, it might have been 25,000. Therefore, I'm going to buy that, and then I'm going to make a build for it. I think that may be one of the factors that's causing us to see this uptick in build diversity. I don't think it's necessarily about the meta itself. I think it's been the fact that we're seeing more power given to these non-deterministic crafting methods than we've had in recent times. And it's creating a situation where in Trade League, people are able to trade for items that they wouldn't otherwise necessarily have been able to get. Anyways, that's my attempt to explain it. I'm going to leave it there though. May your Varlobs have interesting results.